It was a time when Israel was sinking into darkness. After the death of King Solomon, the chosen people of God slowly began to forget him, because now they were ruled by Ahab, Israel's most wicked king. Innocent prophet's blood was spilled on this holy land, hunted down and killed by his cruel wife Jezebel. Israel had forgotten the very name of the Lord and bowed down before altars made of stone and wood. But God had not abandoned his people. Among the hills of Gilead, he was preparing an answer. From that forgotten, barren land, a man emerged who would change history forever. His name was Elijah, a name itself that was a promise of justice and fire. My God is Yahweh. This is the story of the mightiest prophet, the one who commanded the skies to close, who called down fire straight from heaven, and who never tasted death. But this is not only the story of a prophet's power. It is also the story of a man who feared, who doubted, and who struggled with loneliness so deep it broke him inside. Because Elijah was human, and his greatest battle was not against kings or armies, but against himself, against the weight of his own heart and the crushing solitude that followed him for years. Hidden among the silent hills, Elijah lived quietly. He was not a warrior nor a priest. He wore a simple garment made of camel's hair, his face marked with a thick beard, and in his eyes burned a strange fire. And then one day God revealed his calling. The waiting was over. Elijah rose, came down from the hills, and walked straight toward the place where evil reigned most strongly, Samaria. This was the capital, where King Ahab ruled with Jezebel by his side. When the soldiers at the palace gate saw him approach, they froze. An invisible power held them still, as if the very wind itself was clearing a path for him. Elijah walked through the corridors of the palace without announcement, without guards. Step by step, servants moved aside in fear. The towering columns before which kings and envoys had bowed now stood witness to a wild prophet, no crown, no sword, walking as though sent by God himself. And there was Ahab, seated on his throne, surrounded by counselors, idols, and pride. Before the king could even ask who this stranger was, Elijah stood boldly before him and declared the words that would change the fate of an entire nation. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the coming years except at my word. The palace fell silent, as though judgment itself had entered the room. No one dared even breathe. Elijah did not wait for a reply. He turned and walked out the same way he had come. Ahab sat still, neither ordering Elijah's arrest nor cursing him. He simply sat frozen, powerless. And then it began. Clouds vanished. The air grew dry. The heavens shut like a sealed door above Israel. As Elijah departed, the Lord spoke to him again. "Leave this place. Go eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to supply you with food there." Elijah obeyed without hesitation. He went east, and behind him the land began to wither. Cool breezes ceased. The dew that once refreshed Israel's fields each morning no longer fell. The sun scorched the crops, and the once fertile green land shriveled and cracked. Judgment had begun. For 3 long years, not a single drop of rain fell. But as the kingdom sank into drought, Elijah journeyed through the hills and valleys until he found the hidden place, the Kerith ravine. A thin stream of water trickled like a scar through the rocks and dry shrubs. There Elijah settled, a secret oasis in the wilderness, where a miracle took place morning and evening. At dawn, as the sun rose in the east, the silence of the sky broke with the beating of wings. Ravens appeared on the horizon, carrying bread and meat in their beaks. They landed before the prophet, set the food down, and vanished into the sky again. These were the very birds considered unclean by the law, despised by men. Yet God chose them to feed his servant. At dusk, when the hills glowed with golden light, Elijah ate quietly in solitude, drank from the brook, and watched as days turned into weeks, weeks into months. But the drought deepened. Wells dried. Fields turned to dust. Animals collapsed on the broken ground. Ahab raged from his throne, shouting orders to hunt down the man he blamed for Israel's fate. But no trace of Elijah was ever found. Even in hiding, the drought crept closer. The brook that once flowed strong grew weaker each day. Rocks that had been covered by water now stood bare. The stream became a trickle, and one morning, when Elijah bent down to drink, there was nothing left, only damp stones. The Kerith brook had dried up. Yet Elijah did not panic. He did not complain. He held on to faith and waited until once more God's voice came clearly. "Arise, go to Zarephath of Sidon, and stay there. I have commanded a widow to supply you with food." But this was dangerous. Zarephath was Jezebel's homeland, the very place where the queen who swore to kill every prophet of the Lord had come from. Still, Elijah did not hesitate. He rose, wrapped his cloak tightly, and began the long, grueling journey across the blazing desert. The sun beat mercilessly. The cracked earth and dead trees bore witness to the unrelenting drought. No living thing was spared under the judgment Elijah himself had declared. Finally, at the gate of Zarephath, he saw her, a frail woman in tattered clothes gathering sticks. Her face was weary, her hands rough and torn, and in her eyes flickered the exhaustion of defeat. Deep inside, Elijah knew this was the widow. He approached and spoke gently, his voice hardened by sun and wilderness. "Bring me a little water in a jar so I may drink." The woman, unaware of who he was, turned to obey. But as she began to move, Elijah added, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread in your hand." She stopped. Her eyes fell to the ground, and with a trembling voice she answered, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a final meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." In that silent moment, a deeper truth was revealed, one darker than the drought. The real famine was not only in the skies. It had reached into the hearts of people, robbing them of hope itself. Elijah replied softly, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The widow stood still. Before her lay a choice: cling to the little she had left, or release it in trust. She could die with dignity or obey and see what would happen. She chose to trust, not in Baal, not in her own gods, not even in her own despair, but in the words of a dusty stranger whose eyes carried a burden no man could bear. She went home, lit a fire, poured the flour, mixed the oil, baked the bread, and when she returned to the jar, the flour was still there. When she lifted the jug, the oil had not run dry. That day, the widow, her son, and Elijah ate, and the next day, and the day after, day by day, the miracle continued. But then tragedy struck. The widow's son grew ill. At first it was a fever, but soon his breathing slowed, weaker and weaker, until it stopped altogether. The mother collapsed to the ground, shattered. The man who had brought life into her home now seemed to have brought death. "Did you come to remind me of my sin?" she cried out in anguish. "Did you come only to kill my son?" Elijah gave no answer. He lifted the lifeless boy tenderly into his arms, carried him upstairs to the room where he stayed, and laid him on the bed. Then he cried out to heaven, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even upon this widow with whom I stay by causing her son to die?" And then Elijah did something no prophet had ever done before. He stretched himself out over the boy 3 times, as if pouring his own life into the child, and prayed with desperate intensity, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." A heavy silence filled the room, long, unbearable. Then suddenly the boy's chest heaved. His lips opened. Breath returned. Life had come back. Elijah carried the living boy downstairs and placed him in his mother's arms. "Look," he said, "your son lives." In that moment, the widow not only received her child back, but her faith as well. Tears streamed down her face as she declared, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." on a land where altars to stone and fire stood, the flame of true faith was lit once again.